Well, yeah, thank you, everyone. So we're going to go over Power BI fundamentals, just kind of working through some of the building blocks, kind of talk about how to create your reports, where to get data sources, how to manipulate data. To start with, again, my name is Dan Gutierrez. Pleasure to meet you. I'm a Microsoft Solutions Architect. I work with expansion and worked with Microsoft in general for, gosh, about 10, 12 years. Started with SharePoint. It was kind of handed to me as all things are with something like SharePoint. From there, worked with various different groups in terms of administrating that environment to moving different organizations into the cloud for Microsoft 365, and then developed from there. So SharePoint solutions, Power App solutions, and Power BI related content. So what you'll notice about Power BI is that it's going to have a lot of different pieces to it. So don't be scared about that. I'm still learning in terms of what Power BI can do and all the pieces that Microsoft tends to integrate into that platform. So I started off just like you all, with the exception of not necessarily being so analytical and data related experience, but I did leverage the platform to at least do some storytelling for presentations, working with different teams to be able to establish their workspaces, making sure that they understand how to collaborate, and then kind of working with them and giving them some guiding principles. But ultimately speaking, as you're probably aware, is it's your data, and it's the way that you understand it and how you're going to explain that both visually and through dashboards or reports to your audience. So I'm here to, again, just provide some guidelines, some best practices, and show you the inner workings of Power BI. And then, yeah, we're going to go through a couple of different scenarios. So just to reiterate the training schedule, today, Thursday 6th, Tuesday the 11th, and Thursday the 13th. About every 30 minutes to 45 minutes, we'll take a break. Obviously, it'll fluctuate depending on some of the conversations that we have and any questions I might be able to help answer. The last hour, we're probably going to go a little bit into just getting ourselves situated for the next class, which is really getting into, handing it off over to you, getting you to start working through some of the data sets that we share, and then, kind of working through those answers or questions and answers. So the agenda and way I'm kind of breaking this down again is intro to Power BI, talking through the building blocks and, getting to load data. I'll show you how to do that. And then following up with getting you to load the data, working with Power Query, data modeling, exploration, working within the Power BI desktop, and if available, a Power BI online service. And we'll talk about storytelling and data visualization. I know that a lot of different ways that you can use Power BI is just here's a report with what somebody asked for, but ultimately speaking, it's just a tool to be able to tell a story, to get your audience to help make decisions, or at least be better informed about what might be going on operationally. So we'll talk through some of that, and then once we get all that sorted out, we'll talk about what publishing means and how you start sharing it. And then, of course, the last part is just kind of reviewing what we've done, and again, helping answer any questions you might have. So what I usually like to do is just try to understand who I'm working with and what you're hoping to get out of it, your experience, so that we can kind of tailor a little bit towards the information that that you are all going to be providing in terms of just some sample data. So I'm going to go down the list here. We all know Don, so Paul, you are first on the list. If you wouldn't mind sharing some details about yourself.
I'm currently in my last semester at the U of A, grad student for information systems. I just started my job at Be Unlimited as their data analyst, and I kind of took over their IT department as well. So for them, I've just been, majority of my work's been IT, and then they're kind of trying to get me more into the data side of things.
Great. Layla, if I pronounce that correctly.
Good morning. Hey, it's Leela. That's fine. Yeah, my name is Leela Cohen. I'm currently a configuration consultant with CAE. In the past couple of months, I've been helping out with the data analytics data analytics working group. I have some experience with Power BI. I've taken kind of a LinkedIn learning course. Just kind of got my feet wet with that. And then we also use a tool called Domo on the the data analytics working group. So that's the experience that I have so far.
Great. Hunter. You might be on mute. All right, we'll come back to Hunter. Jim H.
Good morning, Jim Howard. Work at CAE, like a lot of the folks in this class. As mentioned before, we use a product called Domo a lot, although I'm not real experienced with it. I've never even heard of Power BI until I downloaded it for this class, and I am a instructional systems designer. So a lot of the stuff that I'm going to be doing is around training results, job task analysis, data collection, things like that.
Gotcha. Great, thank you. Dave.
Morning, my name's Dave Smith. I'm the group lead for quality and improvements at CAE USA, which includes the data analytics work group, or DAAT. So in this role, I'm actually the product owner for the DAAT. I have zero experience in Power BI. As you heard, we do use Domo for some of the reporting to our clients. I'm not very well versed in that either. My focus really is more about supporting the data analytics work group, not so much the grassroots doing the analysis stuff. I'm just trying to get a high level understanding of what those folks go through so that I can support them better. Thanks.
Great. Yep. And Hampton.
Hey, my name's Hampton Hicks. I work at Anuvo as a programmatic advertising campaign manager, and I do not have any previous experience with Power BI.
All righty. Thanks. Jasmine.
Good morning. Jasmine Albrecht. I'm a configuration consultant with CAE, currently working with the Multimedia Design Group. I took a short class of Power BI and I enjoyed it, so I'm looking forward to maybe learning some of the more practical applications for it.
Sure. And Hunter, if you're back on, I got your message.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Hey, I'm a configuration consultant at CAE as well, currently working with the data analytics work group. I'm self-taught in BI, but most of my experience in similar things is with SSRS and SQL Server.
Oh, great. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about how all that's connected. So again, thank you all. Yeah, it sounds like definitely different areas of how you're going to be working with Power BI and supporting it, developing it. So That said, yeah, I'm gonna start digging into, let's see if I can get this. What is Power BI? So as Don said, it's essentially, it might look like an overglorified Excel tool, right? It's got the ability to show visuals just like Excel, collect your data just like Excel, but it certainly has a lot more features to it in terms of being able to share. It obviously lets you connect to your data sources, both from your online services or Microsoft platform services. And we'll talk a little bit about what that means. You can create reports and dashboards, of course. And one of the cool features that I've recently discovered was asking questions about your data. So it's kind of a cool, tell me more about this specific day or this specific product. And it kind of shows you some compiled information from there. Additionally, the added bigger features here are workspaces for reports and dashboards. What that means is you can create your reports and dashboards for different sets of groups of teams. So if you've got a marketing team or HR team, compliance, so on and so forth, there are workspaces specifically for those groups that you can grant access to those specific groups. And you can share the information as well from a consumable kind of format to different areas of an organization. So let's say HR wants to share some high level reporting on how many people are in the company. Obviously, HR's got a lot more sensitive data than it would like to share, but it wants to be able to, provide that information as an organizational report. So these workspaces allow the management of being able to do that. Additionally, as you can imagine, centralized data. So if everybody's working off of one Excel spreadsheet, fantastic. But as you can imagine, everybody might create their own copy of that, work with the data within that space. And then ultimately, now you've got different versions of data. So this centralizes, it creates one area of truth. And then you can start to manipulate that same data as it makes sense for you, without having to, of course, influence that that source of truth. And then it also provides you access to a larger ecosystem, meaning you can reach outside of just the Excel files or the SQL databases. You can ultimately start to integrate with external data sources. I'll provide some examples there, but think of websites that might have some APIs or at least some available data that you can consume into your reports. So questions, I know that Domo seems to come up, but feel free to kind of jump in. Just curious what other kind of tools you use for your data analytics or just to kind of organize your data. And I won't pick on anybody specifically, but feel free to kind of just jump in. Otherwise, I'm going to continue to pick on Don to tell me the answer.
What'd I do? It might be at this point. Just give us your Reader's Digest of the difference between Power BI and Tableau, as far as I hate to put you on the spot, Dan. I didn't hire you for Tableau, but it's a competing tool.
Sure. Yeah. So if people are familiar with Tableau, there's definitely some similarities with Power BI in terms of whereas it starts with kind of three different areas. I usually talk about where's your data coming from, what are you doing with said data, and then who are you going to be sharing that information with? What do you want them to do with it? So I generally, because I'm more Microsoft based, I start with Excel as sort of a base template. If anybody is familiar with SharePoint, it's a more web-based platform. So not only can you incorporate lists similar to Excel, but you can create web pages that basically visualize that data. And of course, you can store documents into that. So for me, I use Power BI to more or less just kind of consume that information from SharePoint and be able to provide those details cohesively across the organization. All right, so moving on. And if you all have any questions or if anything that just pops up or any ideas, feel free to just jump in as we kind of go along. But essentially we're going to be doing is it's going to be some building this stuff together, kind of working through understanding how you want to use Power BI as you start to understand it a little bit more. And we'll certainly start to build some reporting and dashboards for you. So that said, so who uses Power BI? So basically it's anybody in the organization. So if you consider anybody can use Excel as long as, so long as they really understand how to, you know, the ins and outs of it. The same goes for Power BI. The only exception here is from a licensing model. We won't necessarily get into that, but you need a license to work out of the online service. Otherwise, there is a desktop tool that'll be used to kind of work with your data, create your reporting. So how they use it is, again, you can consume the information. So me as a regular user wants to view, you know, sales information for the organization. Just how are we doing from the very high level? So you've got these consumers in the organization that you're intending to create that data for. So when you create these reports and these dashboards, you consider, okay, who's going to consume it, and what kind of information do you want to share with contributors or to contribute to those reporting and dashboards. These are kind of like the working members of your group. So I can start with a base template, and then we have people that can collaborate into that same report workspace and basically start to develop different reports on a single dashboard. And I'll explain a little bit more of what that means. But and then, of course, being able to compile the data. So that, consider that more of your sort of data analysts, your back-end SQL or database administrators to be able to surface up that information for you. You can do that, of course, just sticking in the back-end database systems. But there is something called data sets, data flows, and again, we'll get through that. But ultimately speaking, it's being able to break that up into somebody that manages that data and understands it a little bit in a more intimate way, to be able to say that this specific group might just need this information and scrubbing anything that might be sensitive, risk oriented, or just irrelevant, that's just fluff essentially. And then from a configuration perspective, this is more of your admins to Power BI platform. So what, this goes back to a little bit of the licensing piece. This goes back to, how many workspaces for different groups that you want to create, and then who has access to what application and services that connect to this platform. There's a whole governance model that can be applied. So different roles, but again, anybody in the organization can essentially start using Power BI. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to ask, and I'm going to go to the CEA group just in general. How might this work for you in terms of, can you basically just break this up into different roles for your organization? Is it sort of an all-consuming idea where one person is going to create all the reports and manage the data and then just disperse this out.
Hey, Dan, this is Dave. I don't know how deep I can speak to this. I will tell you that some of the members of the analysis group, they do use Power BI for certain things, and we're kind of learning this. But the way it works, we have a group of analysts, and so what we do is we reach out to whatever source we're going to use from whatever customer, whether it be an LMS, a learning management system, whether it be them emailing us the data or whatever. But the whole team goes through and does the analysis. It's not just one person. But this is something, and I don't know, Hunter may know more about this than I do, but a couple of our folks are using Power BI. They're familiar with it and they know it. And so I think this was one of the things we were looking at, how we can kind of incorporate this into our operations. Any of the other CAE folks on the line are smarter than me on this. They can speak to it.
I'm using some Power BI currently in building Azure applications, but it's mainly Power BI online.
Gotcha. Okay. The reason I ask, every organization is different. Every organization is going to have different roles and different ideas of how they want to manage this platform. One important thing to consider, whether you're just somebody kind of working the front end, creating the reports, or somebody in the back end managing the platform, is really creating a process to identify who owns the data. So as a person who just wants to create a report, do I specifically have data that I own, or is this kind of an organizational wide data set? So again, consider your employee database. Who owns that? Where can you find that information? I personally, as kind of the IT, support person, it's always great when I hear people say and understand from a process perspective, okay, this is what I need. This is who I'm going to be sharing it with. I may not specifically have all the answers to share with IT, but it at least kind of provide some insight and kind of know how to communicate that back and forth. I think that's always kind of a disconnect there, where I just need to create this report, but there's not necessarily a lot of detail behind it. And then from a back end perspective is obviously, if HR says I want details on employee information, well, what kind of information are we trying to share? Are we connected to? Or what data sources are we connected to? So again, understanding the process and any level of governance around these platforms are really useful to getting things sped up, to avoiding any sprawl of this service. I was working with an organization where essentially they basically just kind of opened the Power BI service. They put some constraints and guidelines around it, but they didn't necessarily have a governance around this, where it started to basically kill their services. Every Monday morning, people start logging in. It starts to degrade their ability to kind of work in that platform. Things had to be reset, rebooted, so on and so forth. And there was a lot of kind of backtracking and digging into what's out there, and a lot of duplicate related information. As you can imagine, it's sort of just your basic IT, what's really going on in the environment. So again, just understanding process. If there isn't one, establish one. Governance, if there isn't one, at least very high level, identify who owns what and what roles need to be established. All right, so just at a high level, we're going to talk a little bit about how it's built. And basically, Power BI, this online service, is it's got a couple of different components to it. From the front end are dashboards. Then there's reporting or creating the reports. And those sit into, again, what I call workspaces. And those are basically the your team spaces. And those connect to different data sets. And we'll talk a little bit about what a gateway is. The best way to that I understood this, and this might be able to apply to something like Tableau or different reporting services, are car dashboards. So that, as you can imagine, every car has a console, and they've got different dashboards. And obviously, the newer cars have a lot more digital dashboard information. And in those dashboards, so you've got the dashboard in front of the steering wheel, you've got the dashboard usually to the right and provides your radio, your climate information, so on and so forth. Those dashboards consume reports, individual reports. So items like your GPS system, your speedometer, gas, so on and so forth, are all reports that are pulling from different data sets within your car. So you want to understand, obviously, these newer cars that have a lot more sensors to them. They have, information about your engine, information about your tires, something as simple as door locks, so on and so forth. Those are all data sets, or at least data that compiles your reports. And then just visually speaking, how are those reports going to be sitting on your dashboard? Additionally, what you might consider too, data sets that are external to your car are satellite radio or SXM radio, maybe some texting. It looks like there's the ability to review that information, phone services that are connected to your own phone, contactless, so on and so forth. So all of those external facing data sets also can be consumed within the dashboard of your car. So how does that relate back to Power BI? So we've got dashboards, which is again, that visually, window into a lot of your data. And those dashboards are compiled of many different reports. So again, going back to HR and employee information and data, or sales as an example, that information is going to be consumed from different data sets, whether somebody is compiling that through an Excel file, or it's a lot more robust SQL database, or external services. So Workday is an example. Workfront, if nobody's familiar with Workfront, that's a product management tool. So as you can imagine, if you're managing projects and trying to understand status and tasks, you can consume that information into Power BI. And then lastly, you can link to websites or any data that websites can provide for you. Any questions on this so far?
Well, just philosophically, Dan, I had kind of thought a dashboard was kind of sort of a real-time view of what's going on, and reports might be something that are run periodically looking at historical data. Is that true?
Yeah.
I mean, is that?
It can be both, and I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But
Okay.
Yeah, if we take this car analogy, right, it's you want real-time data on your dashboard. So that's the speedometer, it's the gas gauge, so on and so forth. But another report can be the last maintenance, this snapshot of the last time that you've done this, or any history that might provide you can access. So it's both, but reports can be live or they can be just a snapshot of previous data. And it depends on how you configure it. And of course, depends on how frequent you want to be able to provide that information to your consumers.
Okay, I'll tune in for more details.
Sure. Any other thoughts, questions? All right. So before we break, I just wanted to, what we'll do is I'm going to load up the online service for my own development environments, kind of walk through those pieces there. And then I'm going to show the Power BI desktop later today and just kind of provide you some links to be able to download that if you haven't already. And then we'll kind of talk through the components of those areas. So before I know that we're a little bit early, but if you don't have any other questions at the moment, happy to take a break. And then as I'm getting the environment set up, I'm also going to try to see if I can get everyone set up in my dev environment to be able to access that online if you don't have that environment available to you in your own organization. But yeah.
No, that's awesome, Dan. I'm super noob with Power BI, so all I'm familiar with is like a couple of folks have mentioned the basic course on I think mine was on Pluralsight, to use Power BI desktop to just do a real quick and dirty report, your first report kind of thing. So I'm really ignorant when it comes to the web-based version of Power BI. So I haven't even mentioned that. So that's cool that you're covering that.
Yeah, we'll work a little bit backwards. So we'll start at the Power BI service and then jump into the desktop piece where I think everybody at least will be able to get started, and then we can talk about how we connect those two back up.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll say about 15 minutes, so 8:20-ish. We'll get back online here, and then I'll get these environments set up.
Okay, 20 after the hour. Reconvene.
20 after the hour, sorry. Yep. I'm happy to kind of read the. Great. So just to recap, we talked a little bit about just the structure of Power BI. Talked about there's dashboards, reports, those sit within workspaces. Those pull information from data sets. And essentially there's an online version and a desktop version. Anything I can help clarify in terms of just the overall structure of how this is built? If not, I am going to jump into the online version here. And all right, so we can all see my screen right now. It should be black screen with Office 365 listed. Let me know if you can. Okay. All right, so to start with, generally speaking, there's a couple different ways that you can access Power BI. A lot of the times, organizations will point you to either SharePoint or Office 365 or office.com. That's where you log in with your email address, and I'll give you an email address to log in with just to kind of work your way around some of those areas. But Office 365 is a platform that consumes or that contains a lot of different applications for you to be able to, do your work, collaborate, so on and so forth. Within that platform, obviously there's Power BI, which we'll go into, but just consider that Power BI is a tool that can consume data from any of these other applications online, just to start with. So for the administrators of this, you'll notice that there's some different areas that maybe some other groups might own in terms of administration. So items like OneDrive, SharePoint, something that we won't go over, but one of the biggest components of what Microsoft is using is Power Apps, or the Power Platform, which is to create basically simple business apps. So anyway, all of that said, is this Power BI is just a service that sits within the ecosystem of Office 365. It's accessible on its own, and I'll have this link available for everybody as well too. But if you notice, one way to be able to, again, communicate back to your IT department is being able to access Power BI versus being able to access a specific report or team or SharePoint. It's all kind of based off of the URL that you might provide. That would be helpful essentially. So this app.powerbi.com is its own service again, and it kind of gives you your own dashboard. So I just kind of wanted to reiterate the difference that we notice here. So if I go to, as an example, if I just start at SharePoint, this is my SharePoint dashboard, and this would be my Power BI dashboard. I have access, or it built out a bunch of different sites that kind of surface up here. Well, it's kind of the same concept. Here's a couple of different apps and reports and workspaces that I've either frequented or favorited. And then by clicking into these, you'll have specific or direct links to those areas. So again, just different ways to kind of navigate around the space. So this is Power BI online service. On the left-hand side here, it's pretty common across Office 365 is you have this menu. The home, again, your dashboard, your favorites will, if you click on any of these stars, that kind of gets you started with your favorites list, kind of shortcuts essentially. Again, your recents. You'll be able to create items, your data sets. And I'm going to kind of go back and forth between this and that PowerPoint structure, just so we kind of line up what data sets are compared to, those reports and dashboards. But we've got data sets here. And as you can see, I've got data sets specific to a function of the business, or basically your naming schema is probably something else that you want to consider a governance around, because like this one here, sales and marketing sample, this PBIX is the format or the file format that's saved for Power BI. So when we work with the desktop, anything that you save will be saved as a PBIX file. So the reason I'm bringing up naming conventions and just kind of getting a good practice of that is when you create a data set, obviously you want it to describe the kind of data, but you generally don't want to put something like version 2 or a date stamp. That's kind of taken care of by the metadata listed here. So refresh done, there's some additional columns that can be associated with it, but human resources sample, like it's pretty general. but what specifically is that data that you're connected to? And then just try to make it cohesive across the board. I know that, again, if you're the person managing the entire system and you're creating those data sets, you've got your own system. If you're working with somebody that's specifically creating data sets, but they have nothing to do with, creating your workspaces, your dashboards, or reports, you'll kind of want to understand what that governance model might look like. Any questions so far on any of this? All right. So goals, they just kind of just some features. There's some gamification that Microsoft tries to push, and some sample information on how you can leverage whatever it is that they provide. But it's all just so that you can you can be enticed to kind of use their product, as it were. Microsoft tends to do that quite a bit with, especially with a lot of new features and apps that they surface up. Is how do we get users to be engaged a lot more? So they have this taxonomy, or they have this the way that they communicate this out to their user base, or less analytical conversations and more, culturally speaking. How do we entice you to work with us better? Well, here's some gamification, here's some goals, so on and so forth. So additionally, we've got apps. I'll talk about, I'll dig into these a little bit more, but essentially is a list of apps. You'll have both from the organization, if it becomes a larger, robust platform for you to use, you can create apps, or there's templates that you can leverage that is provided through the, I'll say, Microsoft App Store. It's not necessarily a public facing app store. It's just if you have a license to Power BI or Office 365, it's just for that environment. Shared with me. So let's say that you're one of the consumers of that product, or I'm sorry, consumers of one of the reports or dashboards. Anything that's shared with you will be displayed here on the left-hand side. I go back to the human resources example, where I just want to see the list of, how many employees are in the environment or the organization, but obviously I can't see a lot more sensitive data. So that kind of information shared either specifically with you or through group settings, permissions. Additionally, what it's got here is really cool opportunities to kind of learn or further learn more about, the tool specific to anything that you're trying to accomplish. So it gives you not just examples, but try these queries or use these visuals, so on and so forth. It also gives you these sample reports, that you can leverage, and I've got that in the environment that I'll walk through as well too. And then when I talk about workspaces, I'm gonna jump back into the PowerPoint here, but essentially here's a list of all of the workspaces or the teams or groups that I'm associated with. And then you have your own personal workspace. So licensing, from a licensing perspective, and this is more or less for the administrators of the environment, but let me just quickly jump into that just to kind of show you what that will look like. All right. So I'm not going to dig in too much from here, but so for my specific environment, I have 10 licenses, and they're all consumed right now. As a result of that, Microsoft gives you Power BI for free. What that means is that you can log into Power BI, like I've shown you here, but you can really only work and create within your workspace. You can't necessarily publish your dashboards or reports to the organization. That is limited and only provided to those with a Power BI Pro license. So if you're managing the environment, or at least you're trying to help coordinate and govern that, if you're limited on licensing and costs and so on and so forth, one example would be you can let everybody have that Power BI free license, but only designate Power BI to a small group of people that will develop larger levels of reporting and dashboarding. As an example of that would be executive reports. So you identify the person that's going to be working in that space, creating that. You can give them the Power BI Pro. So this is more or less just the ways that you can manage the environment. But again, if you find that there's some features that are unavailable, it's likely that you don't have the Power BI Pro license. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't go in and create your reports and dashboards either through the online service. And then again, we'll talk about the desktop service where you can continue to work and create what you need to. I'm going to go back to a little bit about the process. So let's say that you create a report and you want to be able to share that. There's a couple ways to do it, but there's limited automated ways to do it. So if you create a report that is, let's start here once this loads. If I want to share this out, I get limited in the ability to do it. So you might have to essentially print this out or email this out in PDF form and share that. So it's just a snapshot. It won't be as interactive as the intended purpose of what you're trying to create. Going back to, excuse me, your online console. All right, so that's workspaces. And what I'd like to do is just jump back really quick to this PowerPoint. So workspaces. Again, when it comes to organization, you've got different workspaces for different business functions. So as you saw, in, one of the reports are sales. One of them are, let's see what I've got here. Cash flow, sales, marketing, human resources. Those can be different workspaces. It can also have something called developed by a department. So you can have an accounting workspace, you can have an HR workspace or an IT workspace. And in those workspaces, you can create multiple dashboards. And then of course, consume different reports for that. So I'll pause there. Is that, if you can start to ideate around what that means for your organization, I'll ask, how would you kind of organize that, or how would you see that within your organization? And I'm gonna pick on on Hampton. I apologize, but in terms of your ad campaign,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. What were you saying?
Oh, I was just going to say, in terms of like your environment. So obviously you're working with in marketing, but there are different sections of marketing. If you were to kind of think through how you organize marketing in terms of business function, do you have any thoughts or ideas around that?
Yeah, as I'm looking at this, I would think that a good way for it to be broken down would probably be by client, and then kind of down into roles for the way our reporting is going to be used. So kind of trying to.
No,
I mean,
that's good.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that would probably be our best bet just for organizational purposes, and then broken down into how reporting is going to be used from there.
Sure. Well, thank you. Yeah, it's as you can imagine, for different organizations, even for different areas of the business, the way that they break down workspaces are all going to be different. And whatever makes sense, I say culturally, but maybe it's just your understanding of how you work are all going to vary. So the reason I'm bringing this up is, from a Power BI perspective, a lot of this is already established for you by your IT department. They've created this architecture, information architecture, and carved out spaces for you already. But let's say that hasn't existed yet. It's always good practice to be able to establish, again, a governance or just a commonality of, okay, for Hampton as an example, you're going to be working with clients. So you've got workspaces for clients. For the CA group, you might have different departments or different business functions that create different workspaces. And in that, not only do you get the dashboards and reports, but there's a Office 365 group associated with that. And that is exactly what it sounds like. It's a group, but you've got specific users within each group. Again, that's generally managed by your IT department, but let's say that you want access to a specific client or a specific department. You're generally asking for access to that group, because not only do you have access to the dashboard and reports, but you'll have access to Microsoft Teams if it's used, and SharePoint sites if that's leveraged, and any additional services that are associated with groups. I know we're kind of getting off of Power BI, but just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about how, from a permissions perspective and subscription to services, how that works. Any questions on any of this? All right. So I'm going to jump back into Power BI. So what I've done here is I've basically just used the examples that Microsoft have provided. Obviously, you can use your own data sets to work through this stuff, but I'm going to start with, from a workspace perspective, this Business Central cash flow. So I went in, and I'll go through this one more time, but I went in, I downloaded the template, and it created an app for me. It established this dashboard, the report, and it even created a sample data set. When you go through this exercise, it's going to ask you to connect your own data. That means you're using this as a template, but obviously you want to be able to use this template to connect to your own either Excel files or SQL data sets, so on and so forth. So I'm going to start back to this app section, and everything that you've got access to or that you've installed will be listed here. Obviously, it's self-explanatory, search and filters. But if you click on this Get Apps section, you'll see all of these templates that Microsoft has provided for you. Google Analytics to, if anybody's used Sales Navigator for LinkedIn, it's basically that connection and establishes that template for you. Microsoft Project. Let me click on NFL Analytics. So just like the app stores that you might be familiar with in terms of Google Store or Apple Store. It gives you, these are created by these companies, like they're just, you know, external application or software companies, or it could be consulting firms that just want to share what they've created. And then they'll provide information of what this means and give you some screen grabs about what you can connect or what you can display. So depending on your organization, you'll be able to see all of the apps, but if they don't allow you to connect to these external services, you'll get notified that, you know, contact your IT admin to be able to connect to these external services. But ultimately speaking, this is just a quick container that gets you started. I'm going to go through this to kind of show you what connecting to external services looks like. So it asks for your name, your email. I haven't necessarily seen anything or any reason why this is used other than for marketing purposes, and just to obviously keep track of who's using their product. So I'm going to do this and click on continue, and it's going to load up that template for me here. Ask me to install, and it's going to start to create those templates and start connecting. If this specific app has any sample data, it will show up here. While that's doing that, oh, cool. All right, so there's the app. You'll notice that it also creates a workspace. So this is where you kind of have to be careful with the sprawl of creating so many templates. It just will continue to grow and grow. Also, as you can imagine, if I download this, this is going to be available to the organization to use. So as you can imagine, there could potentially be duplicates of the same template. But clicking into this space, again, sample data. And because this is an external service, it's going to ask if I've got, a couple of configuration components here, but it's going to ask if I've got any access to the LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is it's a subscription in of itself. So if you have one personally, or if the organization has access to that, this is where you start to connect those items. I don't, but again, you can imagine what that might look like in terms of signing up for that. But kind of cool what they provide you. Again, you can use these as an example or some guidelines, but they make it interactive in terms of being able to click on and adjust your reports for you, and starts to filter out your additional visuals here. Any questions on any of this so far? So I know a few of you have probably been exposed to this. I apologize, I don't remember who, but is already creating some Power BI reports. I'm going to ask, do you have access to be able to use these apps? And I think that was that Dave who was, no, you're a product owner. I think it was maybe Hunter who was using that.
I don't have access to a whole lot. It's a really locked down government version,
Mhm.
and so I've mainly just been using a lot of SQL.
Sure. Well, that's actually a good segue into this section here. So as you can see, when I downloaded that app, it created a data set for me. If I wanted to create a new data set, that would be, as Microsoft loves to do, hide things for you. But I'm going to click on Get Data. And the options you have here are you can upload from your Power BI desktop. That would be here. And we'll talk about that later. We'll work through some of that as I give you your accounts and work with Power BI desktop. You can start to publish those from the organization. So if your organization has a whole data, I would say data and analytics department, generally speaking, these are for large organizations or enterprises that will start create those data sets for you, and you can connect to them. Here you can connect to those services that I was talking about, the apps or the LinkedIn's or Workday, so on and so forth. And then just kind of using a proxy of Power BI to connect to your data, you can also establish that here. I'm going to work with a local file, but as you can see here, you've got access to be able to use, again, the local file, the Excel database or Excel file. If you've got that file sitting in your personal OneDrive, generally for business, I know organizations don't like you using your own personal OneDrive, but it does show up here. And then your SharePoint team. And I keep mentioning SharePoint. Is everybody familiar with what SharePoint is? I know I kind of briefly described that. Maybe a better question is SharePoint used in your organizations?
No, I've never used SharePoint. I don't know what it is.
Okay.
And how long have you been working with SharePoint?
I've been working with SharePoint, for about 12-ish years now.
Okay. I haven't used SharePoint since I retired from the military in 2012. But we were all about it, trying to move away from shared drives and move things to team sites and whatnot. But I retired in 2012. Has it changed substantively, or is it still basically the same functionality?
Yes and no. So same functionality at its core. And then it has changed significantly in terms of modernizing for organizations. So what I mean by that, and I'm just going to briefly go through this. I'll start with, let's go with Sales Hub. So this is SharePoint, right? It's a website, and a website that's tied to a specific business function, department, or group. So for Hampton, as an example, this can be a internal client site. So let's say client expansion. You can have this site created. It has obviously a lot of different content that you can share with your team. Again, this is internal, this isn't external facing. You can have links to different solutions, or I'm sorry, links to different reference material. And then here's kind of the fluff with news and events. But what I wanted to, the reason I'm pointing this out for Power BI specifically is these sites are basically one of two things. It's either a document library or it's a list. So for document libraries, think of your PDFs or your Word documents or any forms that you might load here. And your lists are, this is where most of your data, when we talk about pulling data from SharePoint to Power BI, let's say your issue tracker or contact information, or let's say that you transfer your Excel files into lists here in SharePoint, where you might have, some relevant information like asset tags. Well, maybe there's a cost to it, or perhaps there's different locations for where those assets might be, so on and so forth. So these lists can be pulled into Power BI, so that, again, it's a little bit more centralized as opposed to, let's say that I'm working here, but Paul wanted to be able to see in a visual format what this list looks like. He can use Power BI to see that while I'm updating the information here. Does that make sense? I'm gonna take silence as always a yes. So if you can imagine, again, in a more larger scale, that your team is working out of this asset manager list, while your more consumer public facing group or managers or CEOs or executive teams might review that visual data from Power BI.
Cool.
So I'm going to choose the local item here, and I've downloaded some previous data sets, but I'm going to go with students and courses. So you've got two options here. Import Excel data into Power BI. So this is essentially just making a live connection to that same Excel file. It's cool and awesome because you don't have to continuously upload your Excel file. But let's say that that's sitting on my laptop, and Jim wants to be able to manipulate that Excel file. Well, that isn't necessarily going to be the best way to manage that, because I have to share that document from my machine. And if my machine crashes, if I delete that by mistake, if Jim creates his own copy of it, that data is no longer going to be clean data for your reports. So generally speaking, what organizations do is they put those Excel files on file shares and manage by IT, and access is granted that way. Again, if you're just creating a report for yourself or dashboard and then exporting that report out PDF or email or something, this is a fine solution. You can also upload that Excel file, which brings, again, like what it says here, brings that data into your Power BI workspace, and you can start working solely within that area. This is more or less related to your one-off reports, so static information. If you wanted any live data, there's different options for that we'll talk through. But for the time being, I'm just going to import this. Oh, another thing about those data sets. This is where, these are demos and working models, but Power BI only really works with tables in Excel. It's not yet smart enough to take that Excel file and turn it into a table, which in turn brings it into the service. And it also could be calling me a liar, but this list here will then need to be turned into a table. And okay. And let's save that. Let's try this one more time. Files. Yeah. Yep, there it is.
Yet another piece of magic that an Excel table versus just a worksheet provides for you.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly. And again, if you're familiar with working in Excel, there's a lot of similarities there. It's just a little bit more graphical and user-friendly, or I'm using quotes here when I say user-friendly, being able to work with that data. So again, I just imported that file. This is my workspace, so this isn't currently shared with any other user group. It labeled this based off of the file name, and then it created a data set within, again, just my workspace. So it basically just kind of gets you started by giving you this very basic empty dashboard. But if I click into it, this is kind of your working space now. And basically what you'll have here is your visualizations. And when you select a visual, let's go with this. It'll place it here, and you can extend it. You can move it around your screen so it becomes a little bit more of a graphical representation. And when I talked about like storytelling, obviously it depends on the visualization that you choose, the data that you're sharing, and then where you place it on the screen. But you'll be able to configure that information, tie it to a specific data set. Let me, oh, there it is. So here is my table. And if I go with course, it starts to create it for you. And then you can start to add additional information. So if I go lesson type and I want to, I'm sorry, it looks like it's going to start going down this list here, but if I use that as values, it starts to do this for you automatically. And then what something like this does is you can start to say, if I click on this, then any other visuals that I might place on here will be filtered based off of what I click. So it's very interactive. And then it also gives you the ability to, you know, start with one, click on it to change, you know, the kind of visualization that you might want to display. And basically just you can start to mess with this a little bit. So I'll pause there. I imagine you can kind of start to ideate a little bit about how you start wanting to create your data sets, either from Excel files or what I'll jump into next is more robust databases. And then how you can kind of consume that information into these visuals and start creating reports around that. So one of the things Power BI tries to do for you, of course, is to automate some of those components, like creating a standard dashboard or plain dashboard, creating the data set for you, where you'll be able to analyze the information, create the reports, so on and so forth. Any questions on any of this so far? Like I said, I know that listening to it and watching it, it's a lot different experience to kind of jumping into it, but yeah, I'll definitely start sharing out those logins so that you can log into the environment, start working with your own workspaces. But other than that, any thoughts, questions? Nope. Okay. All right. So one thing I would like to kind of talk about is when we talk about gateways. So we talked about dashboards. We know what that looks like. The reports are the individual snapshots of data that are compiled into a dashboard. And then your data sets, which is the information that you're pushing into a report or pulling into a report. But there's something called gateways. And this is a lot more administrative and IT related, but what a gateway provides you is, so I talked about all the web services, right? We talked about SharePoint, we talked about using Excel, but what if your databases are sitting in, a data center in the office, or maybe just a different location, but it's not necessarily available via the web. You need a special and secure connectivity. So if everybody's familiar with a VPN, it's kind of a similar process, but this is specific for Power BI to your databases. So a lot of the times, somebody mentioned government. So government's probably a great example, right? You probably have a lot of local data sources that don't necessarily need to be exposed to or should be exposed to any cloud version of that. So this is where the gateways allow you to be able to connect into those data sources and surface that up to the Power BI web service. We're not going to go into this because it's it's a lot more of a deep dive in the technical, but I just wanted to let you know that if you find yourself wanting to connect to or not being able to see any of your data from a cloud perspective, there's the ability to connect to it via gateways. And these gateways it's basically an app that is installed on a server, and then it asks you to point your input direction to your database, and then it asks you to connect to your Power BI services online. It's fairly simple, but it's also, when I talked about that sprawl or, the degradation of service, I've seen a lot of organizations stuck here with gateways that start to fail or being overloaded with connectivity. So again, not specific to this, but I just wanted to be able to explain that this is part of the Power BI service. Any questions on this? Any thoughts on how you might want to get this connected, or any thoughts on any other data sources that you need access to?
Going once, twice. Okay, I'll go.
All right.
Hey, Dan, we use to learn just SQL queries. I've got a couple of sample databases hosted on AWS in a it's actually MariaDB flavor of MySQL. Would connecting to that be a technical nightmare and have to do with these gateways, or is that something we might be able to do if I got you credentials to connect in?
It's not necessarily a nightmare. There are it's some additional steps to it. This is a very simplified version of it, but let's say, so you said AWS. There's Azure, if you're all familiar with that, which is Microsoft's version of AWS. They have a load of different application services and infrastructure components that you can leverage to connect to those environments. So all that said is it's almost like you're trying to connect the cloud to cloud version, but it's the same concept here, right? You still need a connectivity service to connect to those that different cloud.
Yeah, even the Power BI desktop application doesn't seem to want to cooperate with me or make it easy anyway. Like connecting, we use a Workbench, you know, the MySQL open source, I guess it's an IDE for SQL more or less. And you just give it the IP address and defaults to the correct port. You give it a username and password, and bam, you've got access to this MariaDB instance, and I got 4 or 5 schemas in there. But Power BI seems to want to make it more difficult. I don't know if it's because it's trying to focus on the Microsoft ecosystem, and most shops are either Microsoft or they're not, you know, kind of thing. But
yeah, and I will say that as far as extending the Office 365 or platform, Microsoft's first go was with Power BI. So there was a lot of, I won't say older technologies, but just earlier versions of their architecture that they're starting to now incorporate a lot more modern connected services. So your example, it's likely you can't connect it. And it's also likely that in future versions of release that they'll make it easier for you to connect to. I talked about like Power BI or Power Platform, and that's probably one of the more newer services that Microsoft has established, which also means that they've introduced newer architecture and technologies to be able to connect to those external services. The reason I bring that up is there might be an opportunity to leverage Power Apps to connect to your data. I haven't talked about data flows yet, but it's essentially saying there's a trigger that automates the pool of your data and stores it as a copy, or it could be fairly interactive, but essentially pulls your data from AWS into like a proxy setting. So SharePoint is an example. It could just be sitting there, but nobody really touches that. But Power BI can now connect to that SharePoint service as opposed to having to reach all the way across into AWS. Does that sort of make sense? Like mud?
Sure. And like I don't mean to knock you off track, so I'm gonna do a little bit of independent research on. I think all I have to do is download it's almost like a driver or a connector to allow the Power BI desktop application to connect into AWS, and because it's really just an application connecting to the cloud, but apparently there's a piece of software that extends but I just got to figure out and decide if I'm downloading the correct thing or not. But yeah, let me hush and let you get back on track.
Yeah, no worries. We're actually at break now, so
yeah, sounds
I'll
good.
let everybody take. We'll say another 20 minutes, so we'll get back on, and I'll talk a little bit more about the dashboard and reporting piece, and then we'll start getting everybody connected and allow you to kind of walk through the environment yourself.
Cool. You want to go to 30 past the hour, half past the hour, or 35 minutes past the hour?
We could do 35 I'm sure everybody's got to get back to
35. So that, yep, cell phone time, 35 minutes past the hour, we'll reconvene.
Awesome. All right. So we talked about Power BI service online and a little bit about gateways in terms of being able to connect to local data sources or just from more secure data sources. I'm going to talk about Power BI Desktop and what that means, and then we'll start to get logged in, and I'll provide that information for everybody. So Power BI Desktop, it's essentially an app that you install local on your machine. It's similar to Excel in terms of being able to either connect to an existing data source or be able to manipulate said data. So this is a little bit more where the Power Query comes in, and we'll work on that in our next session. But you should be able to install that if you have the proper rights to your machine. So I'm not sure that of the current configuration settings that you have with your organization, but if you're allowed to install applications, you'll be able to do so. If not, you'll want to ask for that access if, of course, they allow it. And it's just a simple Microsoft plugin, and then the app will load up. Before we jump into that entirely, basically you get the same kind of concepts. You can create dashboards, reports. You can manipulate the data within the Power BI desktop. You can also connect to various different sources in no different way than if you have access to a specific database or Excel file or an external service. It's based off of those permissions, not necessarily through what the app provides you. So if you're trying to provide any clarification as to what this app does for those that manage installation of apps, or if they ask what that might be, is the simplest way to describe it is it's just like Excel. It provides me the ability to create reports and dashboards, but won't give me access to any data that I don't already have access to. The reason I bring that up is I work with an organization that really wanted to lock down the ability to use a lot of different apps that they didn't vet, and they needed clarification on what this specific app will have access to. And I will say the same goes for the Power BI service. It's just a tool that grants you access to data that you already have access to, or have already been approved to have access to. What I did want to jump into before the Power BI desktop is the data sets, and we'll work through this in our next couple of sessions, but I just kind of wanted to talk about different ways that you can establish connectivity to data. So if you recall, I uploaded the student courses. If I wanted to analyze this in Excel, there's just some add-ons that, again, you'll need access for your machine to be able to do so. You download it, it's a MSI file. You click on it, it'll run and ask you to permission to install, but that's about it. You won't see much else. But essentially, they're just extensions. Doing that will essentially download that file for you, but it has kind of a connected tissue essentially back to Power BI. And it gives you kind of a predetermined, what do I want to say, like a configuration of how you may create your pivot tables and your visualizations and filters and so on. It just gets you started right away, as opposed to having to establish it from scratch. And as you can see, what I'm doing here is that a lot of what you might find is there's a lot of connectivity established here. So Excel is connecting to Office 365, which in turn is connected to Power BI. So just in terms of what that means for your users, or if you are the user, that just be aware that there might be opportunities to leverage something like single sign-on, or you may have to just log in every time it asks you to. But yeah, here's a pivot table, and you can basically just kind of see what it's pulling from Power BI. And as you can imagine, it's a kind of a circular type of experience where this is the original students and courses Excel file loaded into Power BI and then downloaded again into this format. What I was starting here is basically it's a streaming data set. So John, this is a little bit about what you were talking about. So there's a static opportunity to show those reports. And then there's a streaming version of that where it's just a constant flow of data that gets connected to Power BI. I won't go into this too much, but essentially you can create your streaming set by, let's say, if I were to label it something and then I put title, it starts to create a schema for you. You have the option to select the number. So if I put number, so let's say phone number, maybe, say cost. It'll give you this URL to be able to use and connect to those data streams. There's one more component here. If we have time, we'll work through this, but another way to create a data flow is leveraging Power Apps. And what that gives you is it gives you to be able to connect to these data sources. So if we say SQL, for instance, is the database that we want to connect to, obviously you need to know the server information, database, and have the credentials to be able to connect to it. But not only will it allow you to leverage that in Power BI, but let's say you want to create an app. Let's say an intake form is an example for, well, I'll stick with employee onboarding. So if you create a form for an employee to fill out their, some minor details about them, you can do that with Power Apps. And that will then connect to this Azure database or feed that into the Azure database. And now you've kind of got a more robust solution. So intake form feeds into the SQL database, and now you can leverage that from Power BI directly. So you're kind of just essentially creating solutions all within the Power Platform, Power BI, Power Apps, and Office 365. All right, so I'm going to jump back into the Power BI desktop again, local app. This is where you can start to, if you can envision SQL a little bit. I'm not sure if anybody's used Access in the past. It's sort of a bad word with Microsoft, but it's kind of a similar process where you have your data. You can start to visually see how it's all connected. You can essentially Power Query is kind of this whole concept of managing your data, manipulating it, creating different views and such. And then in Power Desktop, just like Power BI, the online service, you can create your dashboards here. So you can create visualizations. You can make it look a little bit more web-based and less kind of like a standard report. And then once you're ready or you have the ability to, you can start publishing that into what we just, what I just showed you in terms of the Power BI service. So we'll go through that. But yeah, that's those are the tools that you can use at a very high level. Do we have any questions around any of that?
We did cover relational database design and primary foreign keys and linking tables and doing table joins in SQL. So yeah, guys, what Power BI is doing is some of it seems to me with the desktop version, it's almost auto magic when you start bringing in, like if you bring in multiple CSV files that are related tables from something like our Northwind and Northwoods database, you can draw a line. Sometimes it kind of senses it based on, I don't know if it's column name or but if not, you can tell Power BI how that data is related, and it looks a lot like that entity relationship diagram with the the forks for the one to many and all that kind of thing. It looks like your data model in an ERD, an entity relationship diagram. So yeah, it'll be, it's clearer when you start doing a little hands-on. So I'll hush now.
Yeah, no worries. I appreciate that. All right, so I'm going to put in the chat. I've assigned users to a user profile for everybody. Let me know if I missed anybody, but basically so in the chat, you've got user1 at creativeatp.com. So that's going to be the username, and the password's going to be the same for everybody. And I will tell you where to log in here in a second. While you're doing that, yeah, we'll start there, and then we'll talk about downloading the Power BI desktop on your machines. Actually, before we go into that, does everybody have access to be able to install applications on their machine?
Yes.
We should be good. I've asked that before. And
Okay.
everybody up good to go with a Power BI desktop?
Yes, I'm good.
Great. All right. So let's start with logging in. So again, I assigned user per person, and I'm going to share on my screen logging in, but follow along, or if you kind of already know how to do this, feel free to get started. But to start with, you will want to open up your browser. It doesn't matter which one, but you'll want to go to portal.office.com. And I'll put that in the chat too. And it should prompt you to log in. And that's where you're going to put in the user at creativeatp.com. And the password is in the chat. Let me know if you can't log into that, but essentially it should take you to a screen that looks similar to this. It may also ask you to go through like a quick tutorial. You don't necessarily have to worry about that. Just close it or skip through it. And what I'm going to ask is in the chat. Let's see.
I'm in.
Okay, what was that? What was that username again? At ATP what? I got caught up in my company's security protocol for a second.
No worries. So it's in the chat, but it's creative without an E, ATP.com.
Creative. That's what I was forgetting about.
And if everybody wouldn't mind, just in the chat, if you could just say that you're connected. If you have if you're already logged into Office 365 through your organization, you might be able to log in, or you can log in through a private browser if you're allowed to do that. One of two ways to do it is if you right click on the let's say Chrome or Edge icon on your here, let me share my screen. So if you right click on Edge or Chrome, you should see new in private window, or for Chrome, it would be new incognito mode. And then type in that URL and it should allow you to log in. So Jasmine, there's the one for you. Sorry, it breaks after user 6, but user 6 at creativeatp.com.
User 2, creative ATP. Oh, there it is. Yeah, no.
All right.
Knew I should not have come to the office today.
Are you on a VPN by chance?
When I'm at home, I'm on and off a VPN. I've had problems logging into stuff from the office. I just knew I shouldn't have come into the office today. So I have a feeling there's something going on there.
Yeah, it can happen. Do you have Office 365 or access to Power BI from your
I've
organization?
got Power BI downloaded. I can open the desktop.
Sure. Using your credentials, you might be able to try this. Obviously, I don't want you to load too much dummy data, but
it's I'm getting a not allowed. I need an admin to get in. I don't know what's going on. I've had these crazy issues this whole class. It's just usually it's on the VPN or when I'm at the office is when I have these issues.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to help troubleshoot. I'm just going to go through this, let people kind of
Go ahead.
Yeah, work their way, and then I can help you on with yours.
I can get on the desktop. It looks like. No, well,
Yep.
maybe. I'll say that now. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No worries. But so the desktop is going to be a different kind of service and connectivity, but in either case, I can help you with that here in a second. All right, so these are just basic user accounts. You don't have the pro associated with those users profiles that I gave you, but you should be able to leverage at least the basic Power BI functions. As you're kind of going through this, you've probably already clicked through some of those areas, but I'm gonna work with this is the standard user for me. So if you click on the Power BI icon on the bottom left, if you didn't see that, it's right here. Additionally, if you click on this, they call it a waffle menu. You should see Power BI listed there. If you don't, click on all apps. And then here's a list of all of the apps associated with that account. And it should be somewhere in the middle. Clicking on that, it'll probably take a second to kind of load that profile. But essentially it brings you to this area. As you're kind of working through that, what you might notice is you don't have access to Power BI Premium, but you can try it for free. I don't recall if it requires you to have a credit card associated with it or not, but I certainly don't mind if you want to go ahead and try the trial, but obviously if there's credit card information, just skip that and we can just kind of focus on the basic functionality. So watch along, go ahead and dig in wherever you feel you want to kind of explore a little bit, but just to revisit and reiterate, left-hand side is your menu or left nav. You can create reports and dashboards. You can connect to data sets if they're established from an organization perspective, or you can create your own. The apps you should be able to connect to. Certainly let me know if you have any trouble with any specific ones, but what you might find is if it requires you to log into an external service, that means you should probably use if you're already familiar with the external service, use whatever credentials you have for that. Don't use the user profile one. Shared with me, again, nothing was probably shared with anybody, but we'll kind of work through that in our next session. Workspaces will be empty. You can create, I think, no, you can't create a workspace. This, again, is the professional license. The workspaces, again, are meant for group related work, not individual related work. And then the My Workspace is specific to you, where you start creating your content. Feel free to, if you're working through this or exploring, if you want to use any of the templates to get yourself started, feel free to do that. I don't believe you should have any restrictions with that. But what we'll do again in our next session is we'll use a standard data set, get ourselves connected to it, and start creating some visualizations, some reports, and then dashboards, and then show how to share and publish that across the board. Does anybody have any questions about any of this so far? You're not going to break anything if you install or delete something. I'm going to take this time. Everybody's quiet because you're exploring. So
yeah, this is cool. I've got a couple of 365 accounts. I pay, whatever it is, $70 a year, $80 a year for my own personal. And then I've got at least one college I work for adjunct. I've got So when we went to log in, it wanted me to pick from like one of those 3 different accounts. But I logged into yours. But no, this is great undiscovered country. I'm looking forward to goofing around with it when I'm not trying to follow along. But yeah, I was totally distracted
Yeah,
looking at
no
the
worries.
apps. Connecting to Salesforce data. There's just so much to know and learn. It's really intimidating and fascinating in the same breath.
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth. So obviously I was kind of going through just how everything is pieced together for Power BI. But once you start jumping into it, I like to try to backtrack a little bit and talk about the idea that it is like Excel. So if you're familiar with that or any sort of reporting or analytics tool, the same concepts will apply. It's just where you find the information is where it might get a little bit cumbersome. But to start with, generally what I find is that people use Excel to get their data started and then connect that up to Power BI to start showing the visuals. And that's what we'll do. It's we're definitely not going to go too much into the data sets and data flows, but wanted to at least help establish that that is going to be available, especially as you start working in organizations where this is turned on. All right, I think it was Jim. Were you having trouble with?
I got it finally.
Okay, good.
Yeah, Dan, I'm still having issues.
Okay, let's see.
I'm sorry, I remuted myself. Dan, this is Dave. I'm still having issues. Like Don was just saying, I can either sign into my organizational account or another account, which I tried yours, and it's saying that user doesn't exist or something to that effect.
I gotcha. Oh, I apologize. I put an extra E at the end of the username that I shared with you. So I'm going to put it back in the chat for you.
Okay. Okay.
And that should be user 4.
Okay. All right, let me try that and then I'll just come back. I don't want to hold you up.
Yeah, no worries. Right now we're just kind of exploring a little bit. Would love your feedback in terms of what you're getting as you're kind of going through this. If you have any questions or if you want to know specifically about any of these areas, this is kind of just the opportunity for us to just look around. Again, if you have any questions or need me to clarify anything. For the admins, or potentially if you're going to be administering this environment, there's something called, well, there's a couple of different things, but you can use Power BI to review how the entire Office 365 environment is being used. So if you want to determine, again, I said SharePoint in the past, but if you want to see how many SharePoint sites are being used from a similar to kind of Google Analytics perspective or website analytics perspective, it's kind of a similar process or tool. There's something called a Center of Excellence. It's a whole suite of reports and dashboards for specific areas of the environment for Office 365 or Power Apps, any of kind of those areas. And it really helps with in terms of governance. You kind of understand, okay, these are duplicate reports, dashboards, these are duplicate apps, or nobody's taking ownership of something. This can be archived, deleted, so on and so forth. And apologize, I haven't. Dave, were you able to get logged in?
Yeah, I'm good. I just
Okay.
shot you a message.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like I have the same, when you went through the navigation on the left, it doesn't look like I have the same things that you went through. I just have like Word and Excel, PowerPoint, you know, those types of things.
Oh, sure. So to start with, what you might be saying is, so you might have this. If you don't see Power BI listed, click on this waffle piece. If you don't see it listed here, click on All Apps. And then it should be right in the middle. If you still don't see that, let me know. I think I just need to assign a license to you. One of the other things I wanted to,
I got it.
and okay, cool. One of the other things I wanted to share is if you notice that these URL, again, if you notice these URLs are different. So this is office.com. This is app.powerbi.com. You don't necessarily have to go here, or I think what I find for myself is I generally just remember portal.office.com as a starting point. But there's, again, a lot of different ways to get to where you need to get to. This, you can save this app.powerbi.com as a favorite. And when you go to this, it's going to ask you to log in. If you have Power BI in your organization already, you can use your own account to be able to log in. So this is kind of this isn't specific to the environment that we're using right now. This is just in general how you can access it from anywhere. What that means is not only from a laptop perspective, but from a mobile device perspective, you can download the Power BI mobile app. Or let's say an executive wants to see reports, they can download that app on their phone and you can create reports for them and they can access it through the mobile device. So just different ways of how to use this tool and product. So if you consider Excel as, you know, the tool that you want to use for dashboard and reporting, one of the cool features with Power BI is that it has a mobile app to be able to basically have the same function, or at least visual functions, as you might have with this web version. So I'm going to give you about 5 more minutes, and then I want to get everybody started on the Power BI desktop if you don't already have that installed. All right. So in talking about Power BI desktop, I put the link to this site in the chat. Feel free to get started and click on download free if you don't already have it. It's going to take you to, or it's going to open up the Microsoft app store. Sometimes organizations block that ability, but if you don't have access to this specifically to install, I can give you a different link to download it. And then again in the chat, if everybody wouldn't mind letting me know when that is installed and you're ready to load that up. And if you have it previously installed from, already working in this space, that's completely fine. There's no issue with that. All right, I'm going to give it one more minute and then we'll kind of work through this. All right. If let me know if you can't get that installed, but I'm going to continue on here. So Power BI desktop, again, app local on your machine. Sorry, Hampton, I can wait so that you can get that.
It's taken a second to download, but you can move on. I can watch. I can follow along. But yeah, it's like barely even downloaded yet. I'm not sure what's going on.
Gotcha. We won't be doing too much here. So in our next session, we'll make sure everybody's got everything connected and then start working from there. But
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
sure thing. All right. So again, app local on your machine. This is completely separate and not connected to the Power BI online service. Not until you publish your report. So meaning if whatever you're working through, you've got your data connected, you're creating your report, nobody could see it until you're ready to share that. Obviously, like any Word tool, it gives you kind of a head start on, getting connected data, open previous reports, gives you some additional information and links if you prefer. One thing I did want to call out is the forums. I had jokingly, when I met my wife, she asked what I did for a living, and I told her I was a professional Googler. It's still true, and she didn't believe me until she saw me working. I often forget, or if I need to find answers, I need to Google, even after years of experience with Microsoft. It's always changing. So if you get stuck with something, if you want to learn how to create a specific or configure a specific visual or create a Power Query or try to find something, one of the things I appreciate about Microsoft Tools is that since everybody's using it, there's such a huge community of people that are willing to share their experiences. And this forum is a great place to start. But just in general, if you start Googling by typing Power BI pie chart as an example, you'll get a lot of information on, videos, so on and so forth. So you just wanted to mention that, if you get stuck somewhere, there's so many resources available to you to be able to help answer those questions.
I think maybe everybody would admit that they've heard that before. From me, I'm constantly.
Yeah,
because I can't remember. There's so many different. There's a different way to go about everything slightly, and all these different tools. I can never remember with the mouse click or the syntax or exactly what I'm trying to do, or the function name or whatever between SQL and Excel and Python and all these things. So I'm professional Googler. There you go.
Yeah, exactly. And I'll admit too, I haven't had much experience with Python. I have a little bit, but I guarantee you all know more than I do. And we'll be super interested to see you all work leveraging that within Power BI. It's just something that I'm always interested in learning as well too. But also, because it's Microsoft, here's the downside of this. If there's any issues that, with the online service or the desktop service, obviously you can't call support with Microsoft. I mean, you can, but it's going to be pretty complex process to get through to somebody. And even then, you may not get the answer you're looking for. You can troubleshoot those issues as well through these forums, through Googling as well too. So not just in terms of creating, but in helping troubleshoot. Just to let you know that's also available, and I find that super helpful. One last note on that online help. Because Power BI Online is a cloud service, it has been known, and I hate to admit that it's like maybe once a quarter, that service becomes unavailable, and it's not just for your specific organization, it's across the board. And it's difficult to determine whether it's something on your machine, whether it's your organization, or whether it's Microsoft. But there's also you can also Google that by typing in Power BI outage. For the administrators, there's the service availability report, but obviously just as a general consumer, there's, let's see, the service notification. Sorry, I'll get the proper link for it. But there's a whole community of people that will report on, if there's outage. So for example, this one, somebody posted in March of 2021 that there was an outage. So just a heads up, if you can't get access to something, or something seems delayed or corrupt from the online service, there's probably an outage happening. All right, back over to Power BI Desktop. So there's some familiarity here with if you used your Office products. Additionally, with Excel, you're going to find the commonalities in terms of navigating around this tool. So up top, you've got your standard home, insert, modeling, and then you've got this ribbon of subset of tools menu. And in here, you can, again, similar to what we did with the online service, is you can import your data from Excel, SQL. You can start to create it specifically just within the tool, or again, you can connect to a sample data set. And what we talked about in terms of being able to connect to a SQL server, if this is just you working and this kind of the way that you work is just being able to create those reports, you know, and be able to communicate that back out without having to share it, you can connect to multiple data sources using this desktop tool. There are organizations that work that way, as opposed to having to just publish content out and have people consume it. It's, this is how I work. I need to be able to review the data, have you know, some reports established, and then create a document or email or meeting or something that communicates out what my findings. And all you need is the Power BI desktop. You don't necessarily need the online service. I'm going to just do this one more time. Just import data set. I'm going to try, I just downloaded these sample ones, but let's try Project Alpha. And of course, if you have something already established, you can certainly do that as well too, but it's going to go by a sheet of your workbook or your Excel file. So you can download just the individual one or multiple if you have those. Before you load it into your desktop, you have the ability to transform that data before you have it saved completely. And again, we'll kind of work through some of those, but if you're familiar with, if you've worked with Excel on establishing reports and such there, there's some of those familiar components, creating columns, removing columns. So if you start with, you know, simple month and amount, but you want to add some more data, you can start creating additional fields or column sets. You can also merge this with other data sources. So if I go to Excel workbook and I click on this, so you can see there's two separate sheets with two different sets of data, but commonalities in between the two. And it's going to move on me. Sorry. One thing I won't necessarily go into, but feel free to jump around in, is the AI tools that Power BI gives you. There's some already embedded features for that. Also the machine learning piece with Azure. There's some additional connectivity pieces that you'll need for it, but eventually I'd like to jump into those and see how well they've started creating some of those pieces. It's kind of neat to, at least from an Azure perspective, how far they've come along with that. So again, you can dig in, you can filter, you can group by. What I was trying to do is I don't think I'll be able to do it at the moment. All right, so let's say I've configured my data. Now it's loading it into my Power BI desktop. Consider each instance of that as kind of a workspace. meaning it's packaged up with your data sets, and then now you're going to start creating reports or pull in. And when I say reports, I mean like these visualizations. This is a report. And then collectively as a dashboard. All that is packaged up into what I had mentioned before, which is a PBIX file. And then that file you can load into Power BI Online. You can share that file by ways of either email, zipped file, or a file share or something. Meaning that person can now take the PBIX file and take that package and load it into their environment. So consider that sort of a template file. So I got myself started. This is what I'm using. I'm connecting to, established data set, but I want to be able to share it with another individual or with a group. You can take that file and you can share it with them. And now they've got kind of their own working space. That might, again, when I talk about like if nobody really needs to connect to the Power BI Online service where they need to publish information and share it organizationally, but they use that as a working space, that might be one way to kind of manage consistency and governance, is to use those Power BI PBIX files with your teammates. Any questions so far? We'll ask, does anybody have any existing data sets that they might have from previous classes or from the organizations that you work with?
We've all done a an Excel project, so that could be something for you guys to piggyback on. And then Dan, we used, it's called the Excel 2019 Bible. It's one of those giant Wiley books, but it comes with a host of sample data, and oftentimes it has different objects, charts or pivot tables or whatever embedded on different tabs. But guys, just one example, back if you remember back when we were doing Excel, there was an Excel file in that group called bank accounts. Remember the one that has the branch, and if it was opened by new accounts or a teller or whatever, that one has a table in it, and it pulled right into Power BI Desktop to give you an idea. But Dan, I get kind of a little bit stuck because, like, I don't know how to do a pivot table in Power BI as comfortably as I do in Excel, and I don't want to get ahead of your presentation, because telling Power BI which fields to visualize in a visualization or a table or whatever, I know there's a flow to it, but I'm not comfortable with it at all.
Yeah, no worries. So we'll probably, if you wouldn't mind sharing at least one of the Excel reports that you've all worked on, then we can use that and work on it together.
Can I do
as
that
we kind of walk through.
Can I share a file like in the chat, or how do I share a file in Zoom? I could email it to you real quick.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind emailing that to me, we can certainly jump into that a little bit more in depth in our next session. But we'll use that as an example. So I think everybody should have a copy of that then, right?
Yeah,
Their own copy of it.
guys,
Okay,
it's in the Excel Bible sample files. We've played with it before.
All right, and then to answer your question about pivot tables and visualization. So one of the cool things that this does is you can drag and drop things, and then you can start to configure them. as it makes sense to you. And by drag and drop, I mean, just click on these visuals and then it places it into this working space. And then what you have is the data that you just loaded will be on the right-hand side, and you can select whatever fields will make sense for you. So I'm just going to work off of one for now. So by just clicking on the month and amount, and this means absolutely nothing to me, and this is why we're going to talk a little bit about storytelling, because month amount mean absolutely nothing unless you can, describe what this data actually means. But by clicking those two, you've got this chart already established. It also gives you, on the left-hand side, you'll see this data table, the ability to see this in more of an Excel version. And then the connectivity between those two sheets that I imported. So it's going off of, if I wanted to say, yeah, just the way that you probably have already gone through in terms of relational databases and tables and so on and so forth. It's kind of giving you this in a visual format. But back over to being able to extend this ability out is all right. So I've got this pie chart, and then I want to just maybe use this table, and I'm gonna connect the same data. So as you can see, it starts with all of the information that you need, and it kind of gives you some basic summary information. But if I click on any one of these components, it'll start to filter it automatically for you. And then if I wanted to add, let's say, this guy, will use the same details. So if I click on this one, it starts to filter out this information, this information. So once we start incorporating the larger data sets, and we'll start to see a little bit better how everything's connected, how those pivot tables are associated, so on and so forth. I apologize. It sounds like there's construction going on outside my door. Let's see. Oh, so under visualizations, again, by just clicking on these checkboxes, it places the information for you automatically. But you can manipulate this a little bit in terms of how you want to see the information. So, so instead I'm grouping by the amount. So tell me similar amounts, and then months that have similar amounts, as opposed to months that have or grouping things by months. Does that make sense? Is that helpful? One of the other things about these pieces here too is there's a little paint roller, and that is where you start to configure these visuals a little bit more to your preference. So if I wanted to include a legend for this specific visual, I can. I can turn them off here. Data colors, you can start picking different data sets, or I'm sorry, data colors for each data set. This might make sense when it comes to branding or just a little bit more cohesiveness for your reports, especially if you might be producing these externally for customers, clients, executives. It makes it cleaner to be able to create these or change these colors around. For data labels, again, something like this doesn't make any sense to me if there's no context around it. You can hover over it for sure, but if you're just going to share this information, you want to be able to create this in a way that if, let's say, somebody just opens this up and looks at it, they can read the information without having to ask too many questions about what this data is detailing. Categorization, it's just kind of another way of filtering and organizing information within this visual. And then just saying, okay, for text purposes, I want it bold or italics. Again, just making it cleaner. We'll kind of go through that. The title, you can change count of month by amount. That just sounds weird, but we'll change that to just as an example, I just want to say month. So that changes here. So this kind of the description of your visualization. This heading 3. So if you're familiar with Word or any sort of web design or Word templates, it kind of gives you a standard. If you notice that size changes, bold changes, so kind of easy to make these visually cohesive in terms of some of the configuration settings I give you. Some of these are self-explanatory. Shadow, it's from a more UI, UX design perspective. It gives you some of these elements here like shadows and stuff to kind of make a better looking web page or web version of this. Any questions? And assume everybody's kind of working in the one or the other, the Power BI online service or their desktop service. Don, I get that that email, so I'm gonna work on downloading that.
Okay. How are we doing? You want to take a break, come back for another 30 or?
Yeah, I think I'll get myself kind of set up with that document. We'll see if everybody can get that loaded into Power BI desktop, and then I'd say we'll continue on for the next session, just kind of working and establishing reports and stuff. I just kind of wanted an opportunity to look at the data just to create some storytelling around that.
Sure. Yeah, you'll see. It's a little credit union or bank or whatever, and it's a month's worth of data of new accounts that were opened, who opened them, what branch opened it, how, and the initial deposit amount. Real simple, and it makes for a good pivot table and like bar chart, exercise. You'll see in that file. But when I uploaded it into Power BI, it had one table identified. How it reaches in to the guts and kind of identifies what's in the file. It showed one table, which is basically all the raw data, and it came right into Power BI.
Cool.
When I chose that table. Well, cool. Let's break for 15. Come back at straight up top of the hour and go for another half hour or so and be done for the
Sounds good.
day. Sound good?
Thanks. Yes, file. And was everybody able to get that file? At least locate it. And then we're going to upload it into your Power BI desktop. Let me know if you don't, and then we can kind of work through that. Sorry, are we?
Where are we at? Okay, hang on.
Yeah, no worries.
I got
Alright, so
both
we're
of
gonna-
them open. Which one am I looking at here?
So we are working, we're going to be working out a Power BI desktop right now.
Okay.
And then there's a bank accounts Excel file that you were working with Don.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's in those
All right.
sample files from the Excel Bible.
Got it. All
Bank
right.
accounts. And I just clicked on the table 1, and yeah, and that's the raw data. That's the actual data. All those other things are like tabs and whatnot, just within the Excel file.
Sure. So I'm not going to do anything in terms of transforming that data. So I'm just going to load it directly. Give it a second. So if everybody can start with that. And then before we do anything else, we're going to save that into a location that makes sense for you. I'm going to save that into here and call it bank accounts. All right. All right, so the first thing is once you get that loaded up, just to make sure that it is, you are seeing that data correctly, is on the left-hand side there, you should see the data table. And you should see that information populate here. And the things that we can certainly leverage on is we want to be able to start creating reports. But one of the things that we'll work on in the next time is some storytelling. What information do we want to share? How do we want to share it? That will help create, the visualization and reporting pieces. But for the time being, just going to want to navigate through some of these areas. So we've got the data. Relationally speaking, or at least that model on the left-hand side is not going to tell us much because we've only got one table. And then one other piece in the top right corner, you'll see sign in. Is anybody currently signed in already with any previous accounts? Hunter might, or Hunter or Paul, I think it was.
Yeah,
have already been used.
I used the user 7 that you provided us.
Okay, that's fine too, and that's what we'll need to connect up to the Power BI service. But I just wanted to get that connected. So again, using user 1, 2, 3, so on and so forth. Enter the email address there. It'll ask you to sign in again. If you need the password again, let me know. I can put it in the chat window. And then after you do that, we're not going to do this quite yet, but I just wanted to show that once we're ready with those visualization and reports, we're going to click on publish, and that's going to ask us where we want to publish to. And it's going to be your workspace. No homework or extra credit, but I'm leaving those accounts available for you all to be able to log in, and whenever you have time, if you want to just continue to mess around there if you'd like. But again, in our next session, we're going to start to build a report based off of that data, and then kind of go through some tips and tricks around making it more visually appealing. And then we're going to publish that into the Power BI service. And then what I'm going to work on with those accounts is the ability to use workspaces so that we can show how we share those reports with different groups of people. Other than that, just going to kind of go through some quick items here. I'm going to work through them just to kind of play around with it. But as you're watching or doing, feel free to ask any questions you might have on any of these pieces. I'm going to recreate this for sure, but what I'm going to start doing is creating a visualization page here, just to kind of show some of its capabilities, but I won't talk too much through it.
That's just a text box you stuck on there? Yeah, okay. I
Yep.
see.
Yeah, so if you click on insert and then text box, obviously you can put in whatever you'd like and drag it wherever you need to. While we're doing this, just curious, Domo, I think, is what you had mentioned, you all mentioned before. I'm not too familiar with Domo. Is it kind of a similar process in terms of being able to do some of these, add some of these controls and such?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I'm still kind of learning Domo. I don't know if the other CAE folks use it more than me.
Gotcha.
Are you asking about creating the visualizations there like you're doing now?
Yeah, if it's what that process might look like. Is it kind of similar?
Yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of that specifically, but from what I've seen, it's pretty similar. Power BI seems to be a little more user-friendly to me, but that's probably just because I was first exposed to it before I was exposed to Demo.
Sure.
But it's pretty similar.
One of the other things that we won't do too much of, but so you've got your standard visualizations here. If you didn't see this, I just went to the home menu, and then there's more visualizations. And then from app source, you can get some additional type of visual pieces. Some of them are paid or you have to pay for them. Some of them, like if they say Microsoft Corporation, they should be available to use. So it's just kind of getting more than just your standard out of the box ones. I don't recall if it's still available, but I've seen people just custom create their visualizations. They look really cool, but they're very involved in terms of coding it and developing icons and image pieces for that. But there is a capability to do that if anybody's interested in wanting to be able to establish your custom visualizations.
That first bar chart, I didn't see where you had grabbed that.
Yep. So if it's hidden, I can start over here. So you've got menus on the right. So under visualization, you just click on stacked bar chart. And what you might notice is there's some weird pieces here. So if, let's say you've already added this, it's highlighted, and you mistakenly click on this one, it will change that visual as opposed to adding a brand new one.
I guess I'm having issues with populating the axis and the legend and the values.
Sure. All right, so after you add it, it's probably blank. So I selected the visual if it's not already selected. And then I just picked from this table drop down, I just picked customer branch and amount. You can choose any one of the other fields, but what should happen if it doesn't happen already is it's going to take and automatically place those fields into each area. So branch, whatever the case may be, what you can do is drag and drop that into the access or branch. I believe you can drag and drop from the right hand side into each of these access legends, so on and so forth. It's going to compile those visuals for you, but if it doesn't make sense to Power BI, this is going to happen. You can click on see details and it'll try to provide you some additional information to kind of help you clean that up. Send a frown is new and Microsoft's trying to be friendly. What we'll go through, what you might find is, so this is a sum amount. We can go with average, minimum, maximum, count. So if this shouldn't be a dollar amount, it should just be a count. We can change the type here. So this is where once you establish like the information you want to place on, you want to make sure that it's still clean or accurate data that you're displaying. So if you didn't notice, I'm going to change this back here and say, click at the sum. And if you notice, the amounts have changed to show millions as an example, as opposed to this says count per district. So if I do that, then you can show that that's, yeah, that's different. Were you able to get that connected?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So heat maps are cool, but one thing you'll need to have clean data of is either GPS coordinates or specific addresses. So even though like here it's a central north west side, it doesn't mean anything to like these GPS related items. It needs accurate data that is either again GPS related or addresses. There's a visualization here called a slicer, and that is essentially your ability to filter and kind of drill down into. There's obviously all these other tools that you can do that with, but let's say, for instance, this data, you want to see any new account or new customers, and you've got multiple visualizations for that. This is kind of an easy way from an interactive user perspective, giving them the ability to just kind of click through, and then all they need to do is click on existing information and then all the other information updates here. So one thing, if we can do for our next session is trying to create a story around the bank account dashboard. So I know, Dom, I'm sure you can provide us an example, but if the exercise is that it's the same data, but I think what we'll find is every person will have a slightly different version of a story they'd like to share, or at least visualize, I should say. If we can all just kind of have an example of that. And then what you'll notice is that when we started creating these dashboards, mine is going to look a lot different than somebody else's, depending on the kind of, again, story you're trying to tell. And by story, I just mean, again, I just want to see existing accounts.
An interesting fact,
yeah,
or or nuance about the data. Okay, everybody got that for homework for next time. Take a look at that bank accounts and see if there's some. I mean, there's if you go in Excel, across those tabs, there were several, pivot tables and different couple of different chart types in the Excel file, in the XLSX file. That may give you an idea of what you want to kind of recreate in Power BI, and also good practice, like recreating a pivot table in Power BI. To me, that's the challenge is, something can be done, but just getting this new tool to do what can be done takes a little Googling, takes a little practice and trial and error. But yeah, that's good enough, Dan. I think we can all take a look at that.
cool. I will say, because I'm more of the like creator of this content for people. I usually just ask questions of others. What information are you trying to look at? So if you're having trouble kind of coming up with something, feel free to ask anybody. Just say, hey, if you had this information, what would you like to see out of it?
Cool.
If it's helpful.
I got another idea. I'll shoot you an email about it.
Sure.
If not next time, maybe one of the sessions next week.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'll be on. If you all have any questions, I'll be on for the next 10, 15 minutes. Otherwise, yeah, I'll let you all go. And
Okay, so there you go. That's homework for tonight is to, or for next time, pull in bank accounts into Power BI desktop and elaborate some sort of interesting fact with your first graph, your first visualization in Power BI. And yeah, Dan, I got an idea of how we might be able to do that exercise with a very simple data set that I think will show the soup to nuts using data that these guys are familiar with. I think it'll be pretty cool. So I'll shoot you an email and send you some data on that.
awesome.
All right, I'm
Sounds
going to hit
great.
stop record, and I've got something I got to go do. So I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful day, and I'm going to hop off and post this recording this afternoon, and I'll see everybody normal time Thursday morning.
Thanks, Tim.